Good evening. It's good to see you here tonight at Salem Creek. We have people visiting with us, whether it be just passing through or here for a short time or looking for a church home. We, of course, think that this should be your church home if you are looking for one. We're glad to have you, glad to have our visitors, and it's our prayer that what we've done here tonight has been pleasing in the eyes of the Lord and therefore has been in a way where you can worship as well. Tonight we're going to study about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's one that I think we all struggle with as we try to look at the life of Jesus and the life of ourselves and how we can fit that mold. And that is the topic of leadership. Now, before we begin, this text on the screen is not going to be what we're going to study tonight. The text we're still going to study tonight is John chapter 6. So if you want to be turning there to John chapter 6, we'll begin in verse 1. You can go ahead and do that. But this is going to kind of set the stage for us as we look at what it means to be a spiritual leader, a leader like Jesus. In Mark chapter 10, give you the context just a little bit here. Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 35, you have the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and they come to Jesus and they ask Jesus, give us whatever we ask of you. That's a good way to approach someone with a question, isn't it? Whatever I have on my heart, I want you to do for me. And Jesus asked them, what do you want? They said, when you come into your glory, sit one of us on your right and one of us on your left. In other words, put it in modern terms, they're asking for the places of prominence in the kingdom, which is a great sign of faith for them, right? They believe that Jesus is who He says He is, that He is going to come into His glory, and that when He does, that there's going to be positions open for ruling. And so they ask, let us be that. In modern terms, they're saying, you're going to be president, make one of us vice president and the other speaker of the house. Of course, Jesus says, well, that's not the way it ought to be. But you know, people are people, and people get upset with people. And so the 12, the rest of the apostles, start talking about this issue among themselves. They start debating and getting upset. And so Jesus says, all right, guys, huddle up. He draws them to Himself and He tells them, you shouldn't desire to lead the way the Gentiles do. See, the Gentiles, they want to lord over everybody. They want to be in control. They want to rule with an iron fist. And then Jesus says in verse 43, this is the second part of verse 43, by the way. He says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave of all. You want to be great? Learn how to serve. You want to be first? Be a slave. Now, I don't know how your Bible translates this. I told you don't turn there because we're not going to be there for very long. But the word servant and the word slave in the text are two different words in Greek, just as they are in English. Now, our Bibles, politically correct as they come, may translate slave as bondservant or something like that, but the fact of the matter is the word is doulos in Greek, which does mean slave. So here's what Jesus is saying. You want to be great? Become a servant. The word there is diakonos, where we get our word deacon. There is in the New Testament church an official role, an official office of deacon that is in the congregation. But we are all called to be deacons, aren't we? We are all called to serve one another, which means to count someone else more important than yourself. To sacrificially serve means I am looking out for you and your needs, and I want to have an opportunity to fulfill them for you. What does it mean to be a slave? If you want to be first, you must be a doulos, a slave. A slave is someone who is owned by someone else. A slave is someone who doesn't have a choice but to serve in the capacity that the master says. It's a very humbling thing to consider oneself a slave, but was it not the Apostle Paul, among others, who introduces himself in that way in many of his letters? He says, I, Paul, am a slave of Jesus Christ. Tonight I want us to think about being spiritual leaders, about being a leader in our family, being a leader perhaps even in the congregation of the Lord's church, being a leader where we work. No matter what situation we're in, we can all be leaders. A few days ago, I was driving home from work, and I get a text from my dad. And Dad said, hey, I got home and a lot of our sheep are sick. And so I could use some help giving a shot to these sheep. Now, I grew up on a farm. My parents live on a farm. Kayla and I have some sheep ourselves. But I grew up with easy livestock. I grew up with cattle, horses. We had some hogs. We basically had it all. But when I was growing up, we didn't have sheep. And you know what? It is somewhat insulting that Jesus calls us that. Because I don't know if you've ever been around sheep or not, but sheep are dumb. Certifiably dumb. And so Dad called me and said, I need some help. And more than happy to help him. So I went over there. It took us about, 2 hours or so to get them all vaccinated. Now, with cattle, you can run a cow into a squeeze chute. Cattle are herding animals, but you can get them away. They have some autonomy about them. Run them into a squeeze chute where they don't hurt themselves, they don't hurt you. Do what needs to be done. Give them the shot, give them the deworm or whatever. Let them out through the head gate, and then boom, here comes the next one. In theory, it works out really easy. In practice, usually not so much. With sheep, you can't really do that because sheep are herding animals, but they cannot stand to be away from the other. So usually all you need is a leader. If you're trying to move sheep, all you need is a leader, one to step out in front, and then the rest will follow along. And as you know from your study of the Bible, if you don't know anything about sheep, you know this, that Jesus is the good shepherd, and He leads His flock, which is us. And so Dad and I get to work. I think this was on Friday, if I remember right. We are working hard. If you remember what the weather was like Friday, it was about 100 degrees and 100% humidity, but it wasn't raining. It was gross. It was that nasty kind of day. And we're out there, and the way you catch sheep and work them if you're not going to run them into a chute is you just have to go up to them and grab them. So we're wrestling these sheep, or I am, and Dad's standing there with the vaccine. About an hour into it, I start noticing a smell. And it's a smelly smell. It's a smelly smell you smell when you become smelly. Now, it's 100% humidity. I'm sweating. To show you how much I sweated, I weighed myself that morning, because I'm on this diet and I'm trying to lose weight. So I weighed myself that morning. I weighed myself that night. People say, don't weigh yourself at night. You weigh more at night. I had lost 3 pounds that day. I don't know how much of that was sweat, but it was pouring off of me, so it was hot. So I started noticing the smell. We get done. I get in the truck. I'm like, all right, I'll get cooled off. I'll quit smelling the smell. I was wearing muck boots, and took the muck boots off, put on regular cowboy boots, put the muck boots in the back seat of my truck. The smell did not go away. I thought, man, my feet really must have stunk to have stunk up those muck boots. But it wasn't the smell of your feet or sweat or anything like that. I was like, what in the world is this? It's disgusting. It was not the boot, it's what was under the boot. Because sheep make mess, and when you wrestle sheep, you get in the mess. And I got home smelling bad, smelling like sheep. And I went in, and my wife is so loving. When I come home, she usually greets me with a hug or a kiss or something like that. She's such a sweetheart. And I told her, I was like, do not touch me. I am disgusting. I'm headed straight to get cleaned up. I'll be back. Leaders have to smell like sheep. If you are going to lead in whatever capacity you're in, you have to be there with your family. You have to be there with your coworkers. You have to be there with the congregation. Whatever it is, whoever you're leading, you have to be in charge of. Now, our world today says if you want to be a leader, you just sit in your cubicle, sit in your office, maybe send out a couple of emails, and expect that the rest will fall in line. But that's not how Jesus led. And I want to be a leader like Jesus. I want to be someone who is able to influence other people for the cause of Christ. And I know you do too. When you look up leadership, there's one word that is synonymous to that, and it is the word influence. If we want to lead, we have to be people of influence. And so we come then to John chapter 6. To be honest with you, I might as well just sit down because Ron might near preach my sermon this morning. It's the second Sunday night in a row where I've preached, and Ron has preached my sermon that Sunday morning. So we're going to have a conference call or something. I don't know, maybe we just need it twice. John chapter 6, this is one of the most well-known miracles of Jesus. If you know anything about Jesus, you know 2 of His miracles. You know turning water into wine and the feeding of the 5,000. John chapter 6 tells us the story, one of 4 places in the Gospels where the feeding of the 5,000 occurs. It's one of the very few things that Jesus does that actually occurs over all 4 Gospels. And when you come to John chapter 6, verse 1 begins with the words, after this. After this, meta tuto in Greek. After this. We don't know how much time has passed between chapter 5 and chapter 6. No idea. We just know that it's the next thing John wants to tell us about. John doesn't write in chronological order for the most part, so it's difficult to tell what's happening here. So we go to the other 3 gospel accounts, kind of get our setting, get our situation, get our context for this text. In Matthew chapter 14, the feeding of the 5,000 comes after Jesus has received news of John the Baptist being beheaded. So John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, is beheaded, he's killed. So Jesus and the apostles are emotionally exhausted. Someone that they were close to, someone that had influence on them, has now died. In Luke, however, we don't read in that particular context of John the Baptist dying. What we see before the feeding of the 5,000 in Luke chapter 9 is that Jesus is getting a report from all of His apostles where He had sent them out to preach, and now they were coming back and giving Him the report. And so not only are they emotionally tired from the death of John the Baptist, they are physically tired from working. And Mark chapter 6 just pulls all these together. So they're emotionally tired, they're physically tired. And when you start in John chapter 6, beginning in verse 1 and continuing to verse 3, it seems that Jesus really, all He wants is just to get away. You ever needed a vacation? You ever needed just one day to get away? If I could just have one day where I didn't have to talk to nobody, I didn't have to answer questions, I didn't have to respond to emails, if I just had one day to sit in a dark room and sleep, I'd be all right. Feelings like that usually come when you're emotionally tired and physically tired. Jesus is emotionally tired, He's physically tired. Read with me in chapter 6 and verse 1 of John. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd was following Him because they were observing the miraculous signs He was performing on the sick. So Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down there with His disciples. Now the Jewish feast of the Passover was near. Verse 5, Jesus, when He looked up and saw that the large crowd was coming to Him, let's stop there. I know it's an awkward place to stop. We'll be back. Let's stop there. Jesus has heard of the news of the death of His cousin. His apostles are exhausted from preaching the Word. And so now they're going to take a sunset cruise on the Sea of Galilee to go over to the other side. Verse 2 tells us that He wanted to go up on the mountaintop, right, on the mountainside. You know, when Jesus wanted to get away in the Gospels, that's where He went, was the mountain. He had a vacation spot. He knew where He could go to get away and have some peace and quiet. And so when we read this, even though the text doesn't tell us, we can infer based on what we know about Jesus and His habits that He went to the mountainside. I said verse 2, I meant verse 3, excuse me. He went to the mountainside and sat down there with His disciples. He was just trying to get some time. He was trying to get away. And He was trying to provide that for His disciples. But verse 2 tells us that a large crowd was following Him. Why? Because they knew what He was doing. They knew that He could provide for them what they couldn't provide for themselves. They knew that Jesus could bring healing where healing had not been. And so they wanted something from Jesus. I've always found it interesting, maybe you have too, that Jesus and His apostles get in the boat, they take that sunset cruise across the Sea of Galilee. That doesn't stop the crowd, does it? The crowd beats Him there. And I don't know how they got there. If they went around on the shore, if they had their own boats, I have absolutely no idea. All I know is the crowd beat Him there. You've been there before, where people just get on your last good nerve. Because people are people. Your job would be great if it wasn't for the people. Your family would be perfect if it wasn't for the people. Jesus was trying to get away. The people followed Him. When you're a leader, people want something from you all the time. They go to you for the answers. You are the go-to person. And Jesus knew that. And what I love about Jesus here is that He doesn't turn the crowd away. And when you read the account in Luke chapter 9, we'll talk about this a little bit later, the apostles asked Jesus to just send the crowd home. But Jesus doesn't do that. Now, what we've read so far, and the reason we pause in the middle of verse 5, is because we see that there is a problem that Jesus is going to have to address. There's a problem. And a leader knows how to address the problem. It does absolutely no good to have a wolf come in the middle of the herd and say, "Oh, well, we'll keep the wolf. I always wanted a dog as a pet. We'll just keep him." No, it doesn't do any good. When there is a problem, the problem has to be addressed. What we see so far in the first 4.5 verses is that the problem here is threefold. First of all, there's the problem of the crowd. Jesus and the apostles are wanting to get away. They're wanting to just have time to themselves, for crying out loud. Just give me a minute to breathe. But the crowd isn't going to let them do that. So they have the problem among themselves of dealing with the crowd. The second thing is that they have a problem of their location. Again, we don't get this in John. We have to go to Luke and elsewhere. But we see that this mountainside that they're on is called a wilderness. Guess what? No Cracker Barrel in the wilderness. No McDonald's in the wilderness. No 7-Eleven in the wilderness. They're not just out of town. They're way out yonder. So you got the crowd coming. You got the problem of the wilderness. And thirdly, you have the problem that the crowd brings. And when you're a leader and people come to you, people can be a problem in themselves, but people usually bring a problem, right? They have their own problem that they want you to handle. And so the problem here is that they're hungry. Now, you don't see that in the first 4.5 verses, but when you see what Jesus said to Philip, He said, "Where can we buy bread so that these may eat?" in verse 5. Now, what you don't get from this text is the crowd coming to Jesus asking for food. What you don't get in this text is the apostles doing a survey of 5,000 plus people. Most scholars put it, because we're listed here 5,000 men, most scholars say between 8,000 and 25,000, depending on who you read. So, a lot of people. Doesn't matter the number, a lot of people. We don't see the apostles going out and conducting a survey, "Are you hungry, yes or no?" Jesus knew the problem before the problem was stated. A leader has the ability to discern problems before they ever come up. We put it this way in modern leadership. A leader has vision. A leader knows their people. A leader knows the problem before the problem comes up. And so Jesus takes Philip aside. And we had a great lesson this morning that involved Philip. And Ron, when he preached, said that he loved Philip. And I love Philip too, but you know, Philip is just a person. And the great thing about people in the Bible is God doesn't stop their bad from us. He lets us see people as actual people so that we see them, we can see ourselves. This morning we saw Philip in a great light. Here, not so much. Jesus asked Philip, and I don't know why Jesus picked on Philip. Maybe Philip was the closest one to him. Maybe he was having a conversation at the time. He said, "Where can we buy bread so that these people may eat?" Well, don't you love that? We don't read in this text that they brought the problem to him, but Jesus, and a good leader, one who leads like Jesus, always includes himself in the solution. There's a 2-letter word in this text that you need to highlight, underline, circle, whatever. First person plural, we. Where are we to buy bread? Now, in other accounts, Jesus tells them, you give them something to eat, which is something else that a good leader knows how to do. A good leader knows how to delegate. Don't you love this? Jesus is omniscient. He's God in the flesh. Jesus is all-knowing. He knows everything, and yet He asks somebody a question. And it's not a rhetorical question. It's not a question intended to trip somebody up. It's a legitimate question. Now here Jesus is knowing all things, but He asks Philip, and we see why in verse 6. We'll get to that in just a minute. But He delegates the issue to somebody else. A leader knows how to delegate. And delegate doesn't mean I'm going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to piggyback you the whole time and make sure you do it the way I want it done. Delegating means entrusting something to someone and having enough faith in them that they will handle the issue well. If they don't, we correct in gentleness and love. If they do, We praise and move on. A leader knows how to delegate. So Jesus asked Philip, where can we buy bread? He's including himself in the problem. So, first of all, a good leader, a leader who leads like Jesus, sees the problem and is willing to address it. Secondly, verse 6 says, now Jesus said this to test him, for he knew what he was going to do. Now the question here is, who does the he refer to? That he knew what he was going to do. Well, the first he obviously refers to Jesus, but what about the second he? Is Jesus saying, or is John saying about Jesus, that Jesus knew what Philip was going to do, or that Jesus knew what Jesus was going to do? You may disagree with me. I think here it means Jesus knew what Jesus was going to do. That Jesus had a plan, and that goes back to what we already said when you address the problem and include yourself in the solution, and that is our point here. Have a plan. Leaders have plans on how to solve the problem. Now, let's focus on the second part first. He knew what he was going to do. Jesus knew from the very first side of the crowd, even when he was emotionally tired, even when he was physically drained, he knew how he was going to handle the problem. A leader, someone who leads like Jesus, thinks 3 steps ahead. A leader who leads like Jesus looks at all options and all angles and asks for advice and asks for other people's opinion. But Jesus said this to test him. So Jesus was asking a question, and I don't believe Jesus had any kind of ill will or bad interpretation of this question intended for Philip. There's a big difference between a temptation and a test. A temptation is given with the intention for your failure. When the devil tempted Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, the devil wanted Jesus to fail. When the devil attacks us and tempts us, he wants us to fail, and he's happy when we do. But God tests us. One of the greatest opportunities I have ever had has been to be a professor at Faulkner University. I got to teach 1 class last semester. I'm teaching 2 classes this semester. It's one of the greatest opportunities in my life. It doesn't take away anything from here. This is a great opportunity for me, and I love y'all very much. But it's just been awesome to see a different side of things. And it hurts me as a teacher at the end of the semester when the course evaluations go out and a student writes, well, Professor Houston just wanted us to fail. He made the test so hard because he wanted us to fail. The assignments were too cumbersome because he wanted us to fail. No teacher ever wants their students to fail. You know why? Because it looks bad on you. It looks bad on you as a teacher. The greatest joy, and all the teachers in the audience can give me an amen, the greatest joy of being a teacher is giving your students a test and getting to write that A+ on the page. Because it means that what I've done has paid off and that they have done what they need to do. They've put forth the effort. It's a great joy. When God tests us, and here Jesus is testing Philip, He's intending for there to be a positive response. So in Jesus' plan, Philip has a purpose. Now, remember the question that Jesus asked Philip. He says, where can we go buy bread for them? Now, Philip responds in a less than ideal way. And in fact, we often see Andrew in this text, and we often praise Andrew for what he's done, but I don't want to do that tonight. I think both of them are very bad answers. So Philip says in verse 7, 200 denarii of bread would not be enough for them for each one to get a little. Now, think about this for just a moment. This is Philip's response. Philip responds with an excuse. Excuses are the enemy of opportunity. Maybe you've heard it before. Change the word challenge to the word opportunity. That'll give you a different perspective on life. We meet here on Sunday mornings and have 230 and we're busting at the seams. It's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. It's not a problem, it's an opportunity. You have a child at home who's becoming a weed head and an alcoholic, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to teach about Jesus, to show the love of God in your family. It's a change of perspective. Now, Philip doesn't respond with opportunity. He responds with excuse. Excuses are belly buttons. Everybody's got them. Now, when Philip responds, he says, we don't have enough money. 200 denarii, he says. I don't know how your Bible translates that. 200 silver coins, 200 denarii. A denarii was a day's wage. Now, y'all know that I am not a mathematician, but I'm going to attempt it here, and I'll probably be told that I'm wrong at the end. But 200 denarii, that's 200 days. Roughly 8 months. 8 months of pay. Let's say you make $1,000 a week, it's $4,000 a month. That's a lot of money, y'all. That's a lot of money. Philip doesn't say, Jesus, we don't have the money. Philip says, there's not even an astronomical amount of money can get us what we need. He gives an excuse. Now, I think what Jesus wanted Philip to say was, you're the Son of God. You can do it. Just tell us what you need. That's not what Philip says. Then we get Andrew. Andrew, verse 8 and 9, comes to Jesus and says, here's a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many? Now, we often look at Andrew saying he's trying to give a solution to the problem. He's not. Andrew is the guy at your job who always has hard facts for why you can't do what you need to do. Well, I've crunched the numbers, but it's just not in the budget this year. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's a legitimate reason. Okay, there's a difference between what Philip says and what Andrew says. Andrew brings legitimate, hard proof as to the problem. Philip, on the other hand, just says, we ain't got it, man. It can't be done. And then we go back to verse 6 where Jesus says he knew what he was going to do. John says about Jesus, he knew what he was going to do. Isn't that great? That even among the excuses, even among the hard facts, Jesus still had a plan. He knew that there was a problem. He had a plan. And that brings us to the next part. If you have a plan, the next logical thing to do, execute the plan. Now you say, well, Joshua, that's obvious. I mean, if you have a plan, obviously you're going to put the plan in action. No, you're not. Don't play that game with me. I've been in church too long to know that. And I'm not saying that about anybody here or about leadership or anything like that. I'm just talking about church being church. Not Salem Creek, just church being church. Here's what happens. We say we have a problem. We need to do this. We have this X, Y, and Z issue. We need to do this. And then you have a meeting. Sometimes it's a deacon's meeting, sometimes it's elders' meeting, sometimes it's deacons and elders, sometimes it's ministers included, sometimes it's committee meetings. Whatever the meeting is, meetings are beneficial but frustrating. Because in the meeting, you come up with a plan. Why is the plan not executed when you come up with a plan? It's not executed because there's not someone willing to step up and execute the plan. In other words, everybody wants to give their opinion about what needs to be done, but no one wants to step up and carry it forth. That's not what you see here. Jesus knew what he was going to do. And so, because he knew what he was going to do, in verse 10, Jesus said, have the people sit down. You got somewhere between 8,000 and 25,000 people, and Jesus says, have the people sit down. Now, I don't know how your Bible translates that. I'm reading from the New English Translation tonight. It says, have the people sit down. The word there in Greek literally means make them. Because sometimes when you have a plan, people don't like your plan. And sometimes you got to make people sit down. That's not where the verse ends, is it? There's a parenthetical statement at the end of verse 10 that is just weird. I mean, even for John, it's just weird. He says, for there was much grass in that place. Who cares? Why waste ink telling me about the foliage? There was much grass in the place, but here's why. Because when you tell somebody to sit down, you're not trying to force them down. You don't want them to get dirty. You're not trying to hurt them. You want them to sit down in a place where they're comfortable so you can move on with your plan. Here's what it means for leaders. Somebody doesn't like your plan. They come to you and say, hey, I don't like your plan. It doesn't mean put them down. It doesn't mean throw the facts at them. It doesn't mean be harsh with them. It means have an open and honest communication. You might be able to learn from that person and their perspective. You may disagree, and that's fine. But sit them down in a place that's comfortable. Because when people are comfortable, it's easier to do what you need to do. So Jesus says, make them sit down. Have them sit down. And sit down in a comfortable place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number, 5,000 men. I don't know how many people were there, but quite a few, right? Execute the plan. Here's what Jesus does. Jesus took the loaves from this little boy. He took the loaves when he had given thanks, he distributed the bread to those who were seated. Then he did the same with the fish as much as he wanted. There are three categories of miracles that Jesus performs. Some miracles are what we call restorative miracles, where Jesus restores sight to the blind man, hearing to the deaf man. Something you had before that you don't have now, it's restored to you. Another type is transformative miracles, where Jesus changes something from one thing to another, like He changed the water into wine. He transforms it from water into wine. And then there are creative miracles. And there's an element of each in all miracles, of course, but creative miracles are where there is no other possible way to say it other than Jesus just made it out of nothing. That's what we have here. Jesus made enough for multiple thousands of people to have, and to have as much as they wanted. Now, you say, well, how is He able to do that aside from Him being the Son of God and having that miraculous power? If you want to take a little in life and do a lot with it, it's got to have two things. It's got to be touched by Jesus and blessed by God. That is the only way you can take a little and do a lot. It's got to be touched by Jesus and blessed by God. So Jesus takes the loaves. He doesn't ask His apostles to distribute. He doesn't ask the little boy to break them up. Jesus took the loaves. He touched them. And when He had given thanks, He talked to God. The word here in Greek is Eucharisto, where we get our word, the Eucharist. Fancy word for the Lord's Supper. You know what it means? It means to give thanks. When it had been blessed. And he didn't just do it with the loaves and say, well, because the loaves were blessed and touched by me, I'll just go ahead and go out with the fish. It says He did the same thing to the fish. Your blessings have to be renewed. So they ate, and they ate as much as they wanted, until they were satisfied, verse 12 says. When they were all satisfied, and they stopped, and Jesus said, go clean up. A leader who leads like Jesus addresses the problem. You have a plan. You execute the plan. And lastly, pick up and proceed. Don't you love this about this story? Jesus doesn't waste. Jesus isn't a wasteful person. He's not wasteful with people. He's not wasteful with things. Jesus tells His disciples, go out and gather up what's left. Verse 12, when they were all satisfied, Jesus said to His disciples, gather up the broken pieces that are left over so that nothing is wasted. And how many baskets did they get? Do you remember? 12. Now, I'm not a biblical numerologist. I don't pretend to be one. My view of biblical numerology isn't exactly that high to begin with. But I do think there's a reason there were 12. You got between 8,000 and 25,000 people, and the only thing you're going to get is 12 baskets? There's something going on there, y'all. One basket for each apostle. Now, the text doesn't tell us. I'm speculating here. But perhaps the faithlessness of Philip and the excuses of Andrew were something they had to think about every time they ate of that bread on their journey. It was a reminder of the power of Jesus. Pick up and you move on. Jesus needed time to be alone. Jesus needed time to be with His apostles, to be emotionally and physically recharged. He wasn't able to do that. But Jesus doesn't stay in His comfort zone for very long. Jesus picks up and he moves on. He doesn't waste, and a leader who leads like Jesus doesn't waste. I've gone long enough. I've gone longer than I should have. I thank you for your patience tonight. As we think about how we can be more like Jesus, how we can lead like Jesus, be it in our family, be it in our homes, be it wherever, it's our job to find the problem, to have a plan, execute the plan, and move on. That's how you lead like Jesus. And it all boils down to where we began, with serving one another. Maybe there's an opportunity tonight for us to serve you if you're struggling with sin and you need to come to the Lord. I'd be more than happy to do that. I'd be more than happy to baptize you into Christ. There's a body of water behind me where you can reenact the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and have your sins washed away. Maybe it is that you're struggling with sin and you need the prayers of the church. Let us serve you. Let us serve you. If you need that tonight, we hope that you'll come while we stand and sing.